Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay. Never comes again, another day like yesterday. Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay.
Good late morning, everybody. For those of you who have been following the wildfire saga, you know that there was a big break where for a month and a half or 2 months, I didn't really do an episode, and then I just recently completed one. This is due to the fact that we had to move again, and the number of tasks coming at us were pretty relentless. But seems things are letting up, and so I hope to get more content out for you guys. So as to the subject of today, you guys know that a lot of times I get completely spiritual. Sometimes I'm completely out in the weeds. Sometimes it's quantum physics. Sometimes I'm commenting on social events or social things through the lens of psychology or spirituality or ethics. And then sometimes I do posts that I hope are helpful for folks actually seeking therapy, in therapy, processing what they're experiencing in therapy. People who, I guess what I do is, therapists have to be very careful about not crossing boundaries or trying not to hurt or offend. Not because we're not human and that happens, but because it can slow down the work. And for people who are badly traumatized as children, sometimes that sets up trust issues that can slow things down for 6 months or whatever. So in general, we're pretty cautious about what we say. And sometimes it's frustrating because there are things that are as sure as gravity. There are things that are just sort of like a physics of human psychology that when you watch humans operate over and over and over and over, there are certain things that when people are doing it, the therapist knows exactly what it is. And they know that sooner or later, they will probably have to address it if the person doesn't see it themselves. And the therapist will have to address it very gently and say, well, I've noticed this thing that happens when you're talking about X, Y, or Z. And I think this is what's going on for you. Does that feel true? Right? But sometimes it can be frustrating because within 2 or 3 sessions, you already know, as a therapist, you already know 2 or 3 of the moves that your client is making. And you know that they're not necessarily serving, that it's just something that we all do. We all do this. And if I could just point it out now and go, it would help you, your work would move faster if you stopped doing this. But again, we can't do that because people are at varying levels of self-awareness, varying levels of trust of the therapist, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the things that I like to do with my podcast is cheat, right? You guys are not my clients, and you may have therapists, and we don't have a relationship. I don't have a relationship with you where I need to be careful. Like I say, whatever the hell I feel like saying on this podcast. And maybe it could be helpful if someone like me just said, hey, this is a thing, like watch this for yourself. And this will be a smaller, right? This is for a smaller group of people who go through a certain, so enough of all of the preamble and the sort of the conceptual room. The thing to which I'm referring is when people come in to do therapy and they're struggling with their psychological response, their cognitive response, their emotional response, their body response to a situation that's kind of been there their whole life because it's something that got programmed into them, or they had a series of very difficult experiences in childhood, which set them up to feel that way. Now, there are clients who have had parents who were just sociopaths, just horrible people, or any average person would go like, oh, those people are just evil. This is easier because the client comes in usually with some level of self-awareness that my parents are kind of bad people. And what they did was really horrible and really shitty. And there's not really any excuse for it. Like there might be. So that client doesn't have a problem if the therapist genuinely empathizes with them and is like, wow, like that was a terrible thing that your parents did to you. And I hate that that happened to you. They don't have an issue because they're angry at their parents and they want someone to tell them, yeah, what happened to you was horrible. And they're like essentially not good people. But there's a lot of people who come into therapy who know that there's an issue from their childhood, who feel pretty freaking guilty. Sometimes they've already spent 5 years in talk therapy, talking about what their parents did, talking about who their parents are, being a little angry about, and so sometimes it's just like out of a sense of like, well, I don't want to be these people who comes into therapy and just whines about my parents for the rest of my life. I want to get better, right? And some people still have a very close relationship with those parents and feel very loyal and feel disloyal and feel that they're being cruel or feel that they're almost setting their parent up. And then again, in those cases, the therapist has to be careful, right? Because if I get out ahead of my client, if they don't really understand, let's say their parent didn't beat them, didn't molest them, but had just a really chronically negative, confidence negating attitude and way of talking to their child, that person grows up, they're going to have a real difficult time with self-confidence. They're going to have lots of anxiety. They're going to have imposter syndrome. Like they're going to have all of these really challenging outcomes that are due to exactly how their parents interacted with them. But at the same time, when they talk about their childhood, nobody's like, oh my God, really? Oh my God, your parents were so abusive. Do you realize, like, right? And they're going to still feel love and loyalty. And if I directly say to them, hey, your parents were really toxically negative towards you. It just sounds like everything they said was either negating or insulting or negative or questioning. It's almost like they spent your first 20 years of your life harassing you into believing that you're not very competent or not very capable or there isn't a lot of potential there for you. And they might have hugged you in between and they fed you and they might have taken you to Disneyland for your birthday, blah, blah, blah. So it gets really confusing for these people, right? Because if I say that, hey, your parents have been really chronically negative in a toxic way. Like they really were not nice to you. They're going to feel defensive. They're like, oh my God, here we go. Like, yep, go to therapy. First thing that's going to happen is the therapist is going to sit there and talk to my parents and blame my parents and try to make it about my parents. I just came to get better. Like, I'm not interested in some therapist telling me that my parents are terrible people. Right? So, okay, so I'm sort of like feeling my way through the conversation, but I feel that I've framed one thing in my head. There are people whose parents are genuinely evil, sociopaths, horrible people, or just incredibly, incredibly dysfunctional and toxic, even if they didn't intend it. I mean, there are parents who believe the right thing to do is to, I don't know, like starve their children. Like there are some people who were treated so horribly and they're so confused that they maybe don't intend to do ill, but they just imitate what they grew up with and they do horrible things to their kids. But whatever you want to call it, there's that camp of people whose parents were incredibly toxic and destructive. And almost everything they learned was the opposite of what's really true about humans and what's true about how humans interact and how to navigate life. And so they have to undo all of that programming. At least they have to recognize that it was seriously erroneous, right? And so now I've framed this next group of people who have parents that are pretty toxic. I'll try to model some of it for you, right? Let's say you have a child who grows up and from the time they understand language, even before they understand language, every time they crawl, every time they do anything, they have a parent or parents who are like, oh, what, and grab them and like, put bumpers on every single thing. And by the time they understand language, every time they do anything, let's say they sit on their tricycle, Oh, make sure you don't go out in the street. Oh, look out, look out, look. No, let's put on your shoes. Sorry, you're going to hurt your feet. And by the way, parents, I'm talking to you too. If you, every single thing your child does, your only response is to freak out and be caution, caution, look out, it's going to go wrong, it's going to go wrong. Yeah, everything's going to go wrong, everything's dangerous, it's dangerous. That is fucking toxic. It's a horrible thing to do to your child. You're lighting up that child's nervous system with fight or flight, fear, caution, everything's dangerous, this is gonna, and you're predicting a negative outcome to every single thing that child, right? Okay, so back to that group of people. That group of people does have toxic parenting, but those parents don't see themselves as bad people. They're very, very scared, very anxious people who literally view the world from this kind of paranoid, anxious filter. And so they're being genuine and honest, but they're incredibly toxic. What they do is very toxic and damaging to their child. And their child grows up with severe anxiety and PTSD, and if they don't become aware of it, becomes paranoid about everything and blah, 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 right? So you take that group, there's that group, but those parents were not beating those kids. They were not screaming at them, you piece of shit, blah, blah. I gave everything to raise you, you ungrateful little brat. Well, yelling that at them by the time that they're not doing that. And the child's birthday comes around and they're like, happy birthday, we love you so much. And they take them to, all right. So that person grows up, and if they haven't had a lot of comparison, or if they don't have a lot of self-awareness, they just grow up going, I don't know, I'm just a very anxious person. I'm very anxious, it's just the way I am. Like maybe I inherited, I think my mom was really anxious too. But this is some bullshit. This was done to you by the environment, right? But those parents generally are not really viewed as abusive. They're negligent. They're emotionally negligent because children need chances to explore and to take minor risks without a parent freaking out every goddamn time. And they need to hurt themselves, and they need to get cut, and they need to have negative interactions and get in fights on the plate. Like you can't just helicopter and refuse to allow a child every single interaction, good, bad, otherwise, blah, blah, blah. They need to learn how to navigate that stuff, right? So that parent is robbing that child of crucial developmental experiences. But in that group, that person grows up and is like, my parents were a bit anxious and neurotic, but they were not abusive at all. Whatever you call it doesn't matter, right? But so in that group, they will feel defensive about a therapist pointing out that, hey, this had a significant impact on you, you're traumatized, or if you don't want to use that, you just didn't get to experience a really, really important emotional, psychological nutrition that is necessary to have experiences over and over and over for your entire childhood for 15 to 20 years. You need to have those to develop into an adaptive, calm, grounded adult. And if you don't have that, you grow up to be anxious, paranoid, reactionary, hypersensitive. It's just as sure as gravity. There's again, this is a stuff where it's frustrating for therapists because you see that person come in and within 2 sessions, you're like, but I know what kind of childhood you had. You don't need to tell me anything, right? But we can't say that. I can't just meet someone and in the second session by the way, you don't have to tell me anything more. I know your parents were negative towards you. I know that they denied you important experiences. I know that they were really, really anxious and they projected fear onto everything, and that you never got to explore curiosity and you never got to take risks. And you were sent the message that you can't be confident, that confidence is actually dangerous. I know that, but I can't just dump that on the person because they're going to be like, well, who the fuck are you? You don't even know me. Yeah, true. But humans are boringly consistent. We're boringly consistent in how we hide things from ourselves, in our denial, in our guilt, and in what our nervous systems do and why they do it. It's not confusing. It's incredibly consistent at the base of it, right? So you have this group of people, and they're going to feel defended. And then you have a group of people it's more subtle. Their parents did something, were generally kind of what therapists call good enough parents. Like, nobody's a perfect parent. Everybody F's up, everybody's screwed up. But good enough parents generally, they make mistakes, and they might consistently make mistakes, but they repair the mistakes and they allow their child opportunities. So their child gets a taste of what it is to be free, autonomous, to be curious, to have good experiences, et cetera, et cetera. And then let's say between 10 and 15, the parents just go through a brutal, messy divorce. And that child just has a horrible time. And sometimes the parents kind of put them in the middle and they have to make a choice about who they live with. And oh man, like, it really does some damage to this person. And later they're traumatized and they're struggling, and they struggle in their attachments, they struggle in their relationships, but their parents generally were good parents. They really struggle and they really feel guilty. And so they'll come into a session, they might not even talk about the divorce. They'll just be totally, it's me. I don't know what my issue is. It's like, I have a hard time staying in relationships. I'm always thinking that there might be someone better. Or it seems like once it starts getting serious, I get kind of like contentious and I'll start fights, or I get scared. And I start like, I don't know, it's just me. Like, I had a good childhood. And so those are the toughest cases, because the therapist knows for sure, yes, we're all responsible for ourselves. And when we come into therapy, we need to take responsibility that whatever happened, now it's me. It's in me. I have to deal with it. I have to cope with it. I have to alter it. I have to challenge it, right? But it still comes from somewhere. And the therapist knows that it most likely a significant portion of the difficulty comes from that person between 9 and 14, or like whatever, watching this brutal divorce between the two people who were the foundation of his or her universe. Okay. So, I mean, when you break things out into pieces, it's not an accurate thing. It's just a way to think about it, right? So you have people whose parents are genuinely just severely toxically dysfunctional or evil, who are physically abusive. They molest their kids. They laugh at them when they're in pain. They inflict pain for fun. They're totally arbitrary, right? Then you have the people in the middle whose parents were consistently toxically negative or limiting, but they didn't intend it that way. They just were really dysfunctional. And that has a serious impact. But they're loving in other ways. They hug their child. They feed them. They're concerned if they get sick. Right? There's that group. And then there's a group that has generally good enough parents, but then there's some significant 6 or 7 years things were really bad. Well, 6 or 7 years is a long freaking time in a childhood. If you're 14, 6 or 7 years is half of it, right? Almost half of your childhood. In these top two groups, a big challenge is those people will come in, and when you do, for example, attachment-focused EMDR or EMDR, which is to bring up traumatizing or formative experiences that had a significant interaction with your own fight or flight, or feeling threatened, or feeling whatever this negative, difficult feeling is that got internalized, we attempt to reactivate that so you can activate the neural network that sort of likes to respond and reactivate to that trigger, that sense of that thing. And then we use eye movements, or we use resourcing to process it. Resourcing means whatever developmental nutrition you lacked because of who your parents were or what you were experiencing, we're going to imagine a resource, or if you had a friend who had a mom or a dad who you knew was this way and they kind of like semi-adopted you and gave you some of the nutrition you needed, we bring up that resource to activate the resource grounded part of our neurology. And then we use eye movements to encourage brain rewiring and to encourage a new type of muscle memory. And if you do that over and over and over and over for 6 months or a year or 2 years, you can process or rewire how the body relates to these difficult experiences. So the problem is that when a talk therapist who also believes in revisiting and accessing that so you can have a healing experience, almost any therapy relies on this underlying mechanism that you revisit the thing to activate it, and then to have a different kind of experience that allows you to reorient and to have a more grounded, loving, trusting, resourced body state while thinking about that thing, right? So that you don't keep having the same trauma response over and over and over, or having the same programmed response over and over and over. So all of these modalities do this. They revisit and they reactivate this thing, whether it's through talk or bringing up memories, using EMDR, whatever it is. Okay, so here's the move. Here's the thing that therapists see that we wish we could tell you about. That we could say, hey, don't do that. Is that the people in these top two groups feel guilty about discussing things in a way that would make their parents look bad or would blame their struggles on their parents. Sometimes they'll just not want to go. Sometimes they just won't even be honest about how chronically negative their parent was, or that there was this consistent behavior, or that their parent lost their shit during a divorce and was like really unhealthy, or that their parent drank for 10 years. Whatever, they don't even want to admit it or discuss it. They'll be like, yeah, he drank for a while. It was not great. And they move on. But there's a bunch of trauma content in there that they're just like sprinting from because they feel guilty, right? Or the other move is they will begin analyzing their parents. What I mean by this is, let's say this is a client who really struggles with a trauma response to anger. If their boss seems angry or disapproving, they have this massive trauma response. And then you dig into it and you realize that, let's say, they had a father who went through this brutal divorce from their mother. It took 6 or 7 years. And during that time, he had anger issues. He would have temper tantrums and just lose his shit or just scream at their mom in front of them, blah, blah. So they got traumatized, right? So what they'll start doing is they'll start talking about their father's childhood and what he went through and how difficult the divorce is and that their mother cheated on him. And, he was trying to deal with the pain. That's why he started drinking. So I understand why, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's great. You're an empathetic person. You're a loving person. You are a responsible person. You want to be responsible for your own content. You don't want to blame someone else. You don't want to sit there talking about and blaming your parents for the rest of your life to lay your problems off. Okay, great, all due respect, but that's not what you're doing. What you're doing as you empathize with your father and forgive him and blah, 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 is you're avoiding the fact that it really did hurt you badly, and you can be an adult and you can realize that you don't have to blame your father or be angry, but that does not change the hurt. That does not change the damage. And it does not change the fact that your body and your brain responds the same way over and over because you were traumatized in that way. So what the therapist knows, the moment you see that, the moment the therapist sees this client going, the thing is I get it. Like, I'm not mad at him. In fact, I feel sad for him. Like, I know his father was explosively angry and beat him and was an alcoholic. And I'm so grateful. My dad struggled with alcohol for like 6 years during the divorce, but I'm so grateful that he didn't stay with that. And he was, most of the time, he was a good, okay, great. Then it doesn't fucking matter. You're not helping yourself. All of that's true. The therapist also empathizes. Something I tell my clients is like, yeah, if your parent was my client, I would feel very heartbroken over what they experienced. And I would feel a deep sense of understanding and a desire for them to have a chance to heal and to have a safe space and to have someone know how hard what they went through was. But that's irrelevant to your work. It doesn't help you because you're not struggling with being a good person who understands other people and empathize. You're empathetic. You're a good person. You understand other people. You have insight. That's not your problem. If that solved your problem, you'd be done. You don't need to be in therapy. I'm going to say that again. If being empathetic and understanding and insightful and being a good person and having good intentions towards others and wanting to understand why others sometimes behave badly, if that solved your problems, you wouldn't be going to therapy. That doesn't solve your problem because your body and your nervous system and your hindbrain and your midbrain and your prefrontal cortex and your cerebral cortex all internalized a programming of some irrational, crazy assumption, right? Kids just assume whatever, like whatever negative happens to them, they're like, it's my fault. And whatever they need to believe to make it their fault, they believe it. I'm a piece of shit. Nobody loves me. I'm worthless. The divorce was my fault. Whatever. And that's in your biology. And there's nothing you can do about it, which is why these responses keep cropping up, or you keep sabotaging your relationship. And then you sabotage it. And if your partner had issues, then you sit there and tell your therapist how you understand your partner's issues and they this, that, and I know why they're this way, and I wish I could be more forgiving. Hey, it's not going to solve your problem. Being empathetic, understanding, and insightful is mild to medium helpful. If you literally have no insight into the human condition, those people don't do well in therapy. You have to do kind of like a behavioral, maybe cognitive behavioral therapy and hope to take the edge off of their behaviors. Because if they don't have self-awareness and awareness of what it is to be like, okay, so insight matters, but it doesn't help you heal. Because it's almost a mechanical problem. It's sort of like saying, let's say your let's say you have a sibling who gets really sick and you happen to be on a camping trip. And your mom is going to save your sibling. And she jumps in the truck or the car or whatever, and she drives as fast as she can drive. And the car runs out of oil a little bit, or the oil's really dirty. And there's high centers on the road, so she's bottoming out and scraping the oil pan. And on the way to getting your sibling to the hospital, the oil pan gets punctured and she barely makes it to the hospital, and the engine is kind of half seized up and blah, blah, blah. And you go to a mechanic and you're like, hey, I have this issue. I try to drive my car and it won't go anywhere. And the mechanic's like, well, what happened? And you're like, I don't want to blame my mother. It's not about blaming your mother. What happened, and it's mechanical. You have to address what happened because it's mechanical. It's how biology works. It's not about blame. It's not about shame. It's not like, it's mechanical, right? So imagine if the mechanic was like, hey, what happened here? It appears that there's a hole. Like, I need to understand what happened here, and we need to start working on, maybe some of the damage isn't in a seen place, and he or she needs to understand, oh, we were going over rocks and ruts, and maybe the struts are cracked, and the alignment might be like, we're going to need to look at this because this is what happened. But you refuse to talk about what happened, and you tell the mechanic, well, I don't want to sit here and blame my mom. The mechanic could be like, what the fuck are you talking about? I don't care about your mom. I need to know what happened. So we have a sense of how the mechanics of your car got damaged. So we have a sense of where to look and how to address this problem and how to repair it so that you can move on. Right? If you have a good therapist who's over their own crap and isn't still angry at their parent and trying to use you to work out their anger at their parents, that can happen. But if you have a good therapist who's worked through their own shit and they just want you to be okay, they need to talk about and understand. And you also need to talk about and understand what happened with your parents and what happened with your experiences, because they're your experiences and they configured and informed your body and your responses and how you were programmed and the sense that your body and your unconscious made of reality. You need to understand it in order to bring in the nutrition that you lacked. And that's a very specific thing. Bringing in the nutrition can't just be like, oh, just imagine a loving parent. No, that doesn't work. There was a very specific way in which you were emotionally starved. And the resources we bring in and the way we address that needs to be very specific to exactly that. Because we don't heal if it isn't very specific to our own experiences and our own lack of nutrition. Again, it's mechanical. If your parents inadvertently feed you in a way that everything lacks vitamin C, and after a couple, 3 or 4 years of this, you go to the doctor and you have scurvy, if your doctor's like, well, let's give you some vitamin D and vitamin E, not going to help you. That wasn't your issue. Your issue was that your parents inadvertently denied you vitamin C. So your doctor needs to know that so that he or she can provide you vitamin C. Right? You put it in mechanical terms and suddenly it becomes glaringly obvious. It's not up to the therapist to blame your parents or not. It's up to you to hold them responsible if they did really shitty things. It's your right. It's your right to be angry at them. Your therapist wants you to feel anger. If you're suppressing anger, go ahead, be angry. It is how you feel about it. Well, why are we playing games? It is how you feel about it. So just feel what you feel about it. Because the anger is an indication of something that happened and how it happened and why it happened and the sense that you made of it, right? I'll give you my own example. I shared this in a past podcast, LA Wildfires Part 2, where it excavated this deep, hidden, unconscious belief for me. So I had this very quiet, unconscious, I had layers after layers. I knew that I had a moral arrogance, and I knew that I really rejected the human race and rejected friendships and really tended to isolate myself, coming from this morally arrogant position where the way people behave really bothered me and offended me. And I knew that was a problem, but I couldn't fix the problem because I didn't really know specifically what the belief was underneath it. And then going through the experiences of the wildfire, I could feel all these feelings of abandonment and injustice and anger and rage against the world, and a feeling like nobody's going to help me and like I'm alone. I'm left alone, abandoned, and nobody gives a shit, and I'm just going to have to fix all this. Well, right. And I knew enough as a therapist and as a human and having a good community who could give me good feedback. It's like, hey, man, this is like, that's a twisted, erroneous, that comes from an erroneous belief. And I suddenly had this memory of a very painful experience I had when I was in middle school for about a year. When my father and my mother would low-key squabble over who had to pick me up. My older sisters had vehicles, and my mom made sure that my younger brothers got picked up. Sometimes if she was not going to make it, she would even leave a message and say, go over to the elementary school to make sure my brother Paul and James are okay, right? And I would be happy to go over there so that they don't feel lonely. And of course, they had someone with them, so they would play basketball together or do whatever. They weren't alone. But what would happen often enough is my mom would tell my dad to pick me up, he would forget, and nobody would show up. And so I'd be sitting at the school, and this happened multiple times, at least five times, maybe more, I don't know. And there were a couple times where I waited an hour and I would just start feeling really, really hurt, grief-stricken, overwhelmed, and I would just start hiking up the road in the direction of our house, which was about 8 miles away, up a mountain. And so this experience really, really hurt me. I experienced a lot of, then in the end, right, there was never an apology. My mom and my dad would argue in front of me. Well, I thought you were going to, I told you you were going to, and nobody was like, oh my God, like, hey, what did we just do to our kid, right? So it was this very painful experience. But I realized, as part of a bunch of experiences, I realized that that painful experience locked in this belief for me. This anger, well, first it locked in this emotional response of this anger, this rage against the world, that humans are full of shit. And I developed this coping mechanism, which is I will be morally transparent. I will hold myself to an impossibly high moral standard. I will not lie, cheat, or steal, even if no one's watching. I don't give a shit. I will be absolutely the best person that I can be. I will always be as kind as I can be. I will be honest even when it directly hurts me. I'll be honest with people who are actually attacking me and shitty and attacking me for no reason. If I did do something wrong, I'll say I did something wrong. But all of this came out of this rage because that gave me permission to hate the human race and to be like, fuck you. Fuck all of you. I get to hate you. You're a bunch of worthless, childish pieces of shit. And I don't owe you a fucking thing ever. That was real. Like I really walked around with that as a conscious underpinning of this emotional psychological response to this experience. But when I really sank down into the experience, what I realized is like, oh, I felt really terribly hurt. And what really happened is I formed this belief, I'm so worthless, not even my own parents want me. Right? Not even my own parents remember to show up. That was the belief that got created, this erroneous belief, right? Even if my parents were sick, even if they were forgetting me, even if they didn't care about me, that doesn't mean that I'm worthless, right? There's this distortion in it. There's a distortion in it. It starts with the assumption, I'm so worthless, even my own parents don't want me, can't remember to come pick me up. They couldn't remember to pick me up. That doesn't mean that I'm worthless, right? So there's that distortion. So I sank down into that thing. Now here's the thing. I can deal with the fact that I believe that, or I believed that, and I can address, right? I can revisit that, blah, blah, blah. What would the point be? Look, the reason I know that it doesn't help you to sit there and analyze your parents and to be like, well, but they do, and let them off the hook because it really wasn't their fault and be understanding of that, is because I did that for years. I analyzed my parents for years. And my father shared things with me. He had a horrific childhood. You know, his mom would send him with his older brothers and they were absolutely brutal. She forced them to take him into town to go to a movie and they didn't want to. So they took a rope and they tied him to a tree and left him. And he was there for hours crying until some stranger let him go. Okay, like, yeah, that could explain how a father might be traumatized and configured in a way, because to really remember or connect to how badly it hurt me would also have to connect him to how badly he was hurt. My grandfather, his father, after my dad's mother died, would drive all the way from Missouri to a town in Washington and drive on the 205, which was literally half an hour from our house. And like once a year, he would drive and pass by my father and his own 5 grandkids, me and my siblings. And not once did he take a half-hour drive to come see his son. Okay, like I understand. I can empathize. I understand how my dad could have ended up being the kind of person who would be incapable of connecting to how hurtful that was. And that he needed seriously to do some repair. Contributes nothing. Me understanding that about my dad did not help me heal. You know what helped me heal? Revisiting and owning the anger and the rage and the hurt, and then allowing that, not spinning in it, but allowing that to direct me to like, oh my God, I created a belief about myself. I created a belief about myself that was entirely erroneous. I took 2 things, my situation or my circumstance. My parents can't be bothered to pick me up. They don't even remember who was supposed to, or that I needed to be picked up. And then I used that to go, I'm worthless. I'm so worthless. Now, in my defense, that was not even close to the worst experiences I had in my childhood, starting as early as I can remember. There were far worse things happening. But that's not the point. I'm using that situation to demonstrate to you that your therapist knows or should know 2 things. 1, there's no value in spending 10, 15, 20 years just blaming your parents and blaming your parents and blaming, like you do have to get to work. There's a mechanical problem. There's a mechanical problem. There was a mechanical problem with my body. And it was that my body was manifesting behaviors, attitudes, ways of being that reflected this thing that I believed, this belief that got written into my unconscious. I'm so worthless, my parents can't be bothered to pick me up from middle school. Right? It became a mechanical problem. It became something that was written into the software, maybe even into the hardware. So your therapist needs to know that you shouldn't just sit there and ruminate for years. But your therapist also needs to know that you cannot dismiss what happened and that it was your parents who did it. I've had other people be shitty to me, be really shitty to me, but it didn't have that big of an impact because they were not my parents. I had one specific coach who was a complete asshole to me, to the point that I was badly suicidal in my freshman year. It wasn't only him. I don't feel tons of anger. He's just a narcissistic prick, but he's not my parents. My parents were the ones who hurt me, right? So it's not about blaming or not blaming. It is that you need to activate and become present to these experiences. You need to become present to what you actually feel or what you actually felt. Right? You get that a lot too. Clients intellectually talking about like, oh my God, this and that. And yeah, like I used to be really angry. I said, no, your body's still angry about it. It's just you've thought your way into a frothy sort of place above it. Right? And so those 2 groups will feel really guilty about talking about their parents, about holding their parents responsible, blah, blah, blah. But if you have a good therapist, it's not about blaming them or not blaming, like it's irrelevant. They are a key component in how you got hurt or how you got robbed of emotional nutrition or developmental nutrition. And the way they behaved was the thing that created the lack or blocked you from, right? Blah, blah, blah. Your therapist doesn't need to be mad at them, but you do have to visit that thing. And you do have to sink down from the psychology into the emotional responses, and you have to be with the emotional responses, and then you have to sink down under that and figure out what the unconscious belief, erroneous belief was that you created about yourself. And you can't do that by distracting yourself with how it's not your parents' fault, because it's not about them being at fault or not being at fault. It happened, right? So go back to the mechanic scenario. Whether your mother was some crazy drunk who drove like a mad person down the mountain and destroyed your car, or whether she was doing it because she had to do it to save your sibling who was having a medical crisis, the damage is the same. Well, it's not. There's a lot more emotional, psychological damage when you kind of low-key understand that your parent did it from a shitty place. But just to keep the analogy simple, to keep the model simple, your biology internalizes this damage, internalizes erroneous self-beliefs, and that erroneous self-belief drives these distorted, exaggerated emotions to other things in your adult life, which messes you up, which is why you go to therapy. So you need to go back, and you can't avoid what happened and your parents' part in it. If you want to be angry, that's your right. But your therapist is not angry at your parents, unless, again, they're like really evil, shitty people. And that happens too. And they're not there to convince you to blame them or to make your life about how fucked up your parents are. They're there to go, let's look at the exact type of emotional nutrition that was lost. Right? In my case, it was an emotional nutrition that allowed me to feel like an important part of my family, which robs you of the feeling of being an important part of your community, right? Because I was also watching the other football players get picked up, and right, so everybody matters except for me. Everybody matters except for me. So it was this specific type of emotional nutrition that was lacking. To heal, I had to address that specific kind of emotional nutrition, just like a mechanic has to know what exactly happened. Did your mom high center the vehicle? Then we're going to need to look at the oil pan, and we're going to need to look at the shock absorbers and the struts. Like there's we need to look at that, and then we need to address it specifically when we find the damage. It's the same thing. It's not about your parents or not about your parents, not about your parents, right? So here's what your therapist, if your therapist is a good therapist, wants you to know. That they may be too cautious and they may not know whether you're ready to hear it or not, or blah, blah, blah. When you're in therapy and you're trying to figure out, why do I have these responses? How do I heal? How do I improve? How do I give myself this emotional nutrition that's necessary? Sorry, guys, I lost the thread of what I was going to say. When I'm doing this, and I remember when I'm doing this, and then I suddenly pop out and start going, but the thing is like, I know my mom, like, oh my God, like her mother was so brutal. I know my grandmother was so brutal to her and cruel, and she put her down all the time. And she actually forced her to go to boarding school when she was 10. And like, I know what my mom, what makes no difference. Like, it doesn't help you. We know that you're just distracting yourself because it's painful. You can say it's because you feel guilty, but in the end, it's just painful. And yes, you do feel guilty, and you're not a bad person, so you don't want to be mean to your parents, but it's just a distraction. It's just a distraction. So, because this is my podcast and I get to say what I want to say, I chose today to do another episode that's really about therapy and psychology. And some of these I call what your therapist wants to tell you but can't when they're your therapist, but I'm not your therapist. Is that when you're dealing with damaged programming or difficult or painful experiences, and you're trying to fix or trying to respond to and heal a way of being in the world that doesn't work for you, and you're doing the work and you suddenly start feeling guilty and start feeling like you want to tell your therapist, hey, like my parents really are not bad people and I understand what they went through. And then you start spending like 20 minutes of your therapy time explaining to the therapist what your parents went through. If you need to do that, go ahead, it's your therapy. But mostly your therapist knows you're distracting yourself from the pain of facing what happened. And you're going to have to face it. And you're going to have to learn what erroneous belief got written in because of it. And you're going to have to heal that and give yourself the emotional nutrition that was lost because of that experience. So don't distract yourself by analyzing your parents and empathizing with why they did what they blah, blah, blah. Your therapist can do that in their head, or it's not even relevant, right? It's not even really relevant. You had some experiences in which you were denied essential emotional nutrition, and don't think that you know what it is, because if you grew up without it, that's just your normal. You don't even know that it exists. Someone who grows up without vitamin C has tons of problems that they blame on themselves, but they don't even know that vitamin C is a thing until they give it to themselves and go, oh my God. How did my parents not know this? Well, they didn't. So give it to yourself, give it to yourself, give it to yourself, right? So that's the message for today. You don't need to apologize for talking about your parents. You don't need to analyze your parents. You don't need to blame them or not blame them. They were the circumstances that created the emotional lack. And you need to know what happened, and you need to talk about it, and you need to share it, and you need to understand how it created a lack so that you can give yourself what was missing. If you just spend a bunch of time, if you're spending like half an hour explaining to yourself or to your therapist about how it's not your parents' fault and you understand what a difficult childhood they did, you're just wasting your own time and money. You're wasting your own time and money. Get to your work and get to the emotional nutrition that was lacking. Get to what happened to you that created an erroneous belief about you. And that's going to involve, 99% of the time, it's going to involve talking about how your parents treated you and decisions that they made that were not good for a child. You don't have to blame them. You don't have to feel angry. You don't have to take them off the hook by explaining that they had a difficult childhood. Just get to the emotional nutrition that you lacked and give it to yourself so that you can move on. All right, guys, that's my message for today. It's always fun talking to you. I love you guys, and I'll talk to you next time. Take care.
Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay.